Rowan Lynn watched red wine spread across the white marble like a wound no one wished to acknowledge. A servant bent quickly to clean it, her silver tray trembling in both hands. Around her, the banquet hall remained immaculate crystal chandeliers, pale roses, rain-darkened windows, and portraits of dead ancestors looking down with unblinking patience. Adrian Vale did not look at the broken glass. He stood 3 steps ahead of Rowan, one hand resting loosely around a champagne flute, his black suit cut with the severity of mourning. He was not speaking, yet the room had shaped itself around his silence. Guests watched him with the distance reserved for storms and knives. Tonight was the 5th memorial banquet for Elias Voss, the young man whose death had once made the Vale family close its doors for an entire winter. Rowan had attended all 5 years. He knew where the lilies would be placed, which guests would cry too loudly, and that he would stand beside Adrian like a well-dressed shadow until the night ended. "Your cuff is loose," Rowan said quietly. Adrian glanced down. The cufflink, black pearl set in silver, had slipped near his wrist. Without waiting for permission, Rowan stepped closer and fixed it. Adrian lowered his gaze to him, expression unreadable, the faint scent of cedar and cold smoke pressing through his formal suppressant. The gesture lasted seconds, intimate enough to notice, restrained enough to deny. Rowan withdrew first. He had always understood the invisible line between them. He could be useful, presentably, considerate, and quiet. He could not ask to be wanted. "You should eat something," Rowan said after a while, because Adrian had not touched dinner. "The board meeting tomorrow begins at 8. Adrian's mouth barely moved. "You remembered." "I usually do. That is why I keep you with me." The sentence was not cruel. That made it worse. Adrian said it as one might acknowledge a reliable watch. Rowan felt the words settle beneath his ribs. Familiar in shape. He nodded, composed enough that no one would have found anything to pity. A toast began near the central portrait. Elias's photograph stood beneath an arch of white lilies, his smile preserved in a silver frame. He had been beautiful in the easy, luminous way that made people soften before they understood why. Soft, brown hair, gentle eyes, a refined omega's posture. The room turned toward him as if memory had entered. Rowan turned too. For a moment, chandelier light caught his reflection in the glass beside Elias's photograph. The resemblance was not exact. Rowan's features were quieter, his eyes darker, his mouth less inclined toward sweetness. But grief did not require accuracy. Only an outline close enough to hold what the living refused to release. The toast ended. Adrian's fingers tightened once around his glass. Rowan saw it because he was always watching Adrian when no one else dared. He saw the whitening of knuckles, the shallow pause in breath, the way Adrian's eyes stayed, fixed on the photograph with something too hard for tenderness and too old for love. Rowan had spent years trying to read that expression. Tonight, for the first time, he wondered whether hope had translated it incorrectly. He excused himself before the second toast. In the corridor outside the banquet hall, the air smelled of rain, extinguished candles, and expensive perfume. The servants had left a side door open for ventilation, and cold wind slipped through, lifting the edge of Rowan's coat. Inside, the lilies had begun to feel like a hand over his mouth. 2 voices drifted from the alcove near the private lounge. "I nearly mistook him for Elias when he turned around earlier," a woman said with a laugh too soft to be innocent. "Adrian chose well, didn't he? Same build, same quiet manners." Another voice answered, older and tired. "Not the same. Elias was warmer." Of course, but warmth was never what Adrian wanted after the accident. A resemblance is easier. It does not argue. It does not die twice. The woman paused, then added, Camille said Adrian had the East Room renovated exactly as Elias liked it. White curtains, antique desk, those rain-colored lamps, and the perfume, what was it called? Winter iris. Yes, I smelled it on Rowan last year. Poor thing. Do you think he knows? There was a pause, then a quieter reply. People know what they can survive knowing. Rowan did not move until the voices faded. Nothing around him changed. His reflection in the window was still calm. His pulse had become something separate, beating like a fist against a locked door. Winter iris. He had never liked the perfume. Adrian had given it to him 3 winters ago, placing the narrow glass bottle on the dresser without ceremony. Rowan had worn it twice because Adrian's eyes had lingered the first time. He remembered feeling foolishly happy. A door opened behind him. Camille stepped into the corridor. Pausing when she saw him, she understood too much with a single glance. Rowan, she said mildly. Guests are asking after Adrian. You should return. He turned. Was the East Room Elias's? Cammie's expression did not change, but something cooled in her eyes. This is hardly the place. Was it? Many rooms in that house belonged to many people before you arrived. She adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist. You are an intelligent young man. Intelligence should teach restraint, not theatrical injury. Rowan almost smiled. For years, he had mistaken humiliation for discipline because everyone around Adrian called it restraint. I see, he said. No, you do not. Camille's voice sharpened just enough to reveal the person beneath the polish. Adrian is not easy to stand beside. If he allows you that place, do not ruin it by asking for a history that was never yours. The words should have cut. Instead, they clarified. Rowan bowed with the flawless courtesy the Vale family had trained into him and returned to the banquet hall. No one noticed the moment a person stopped waiting to be chosen. Adrian was standing near the terrace doors when Rowan came back. Rain hammered softly against the glass behind him, blurring the city into silver lines. He glanced at Rowan once, and his gaze paused. Perhaps he saw the paleness beneath Rowan's composure. Perhaps he smelled the faint disturbance in his scent, despite the suppressant. Where did you go? He asked. Outside. It is cold. Yes. Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. Did someone say something to you? Rowan looked at him then. The answer sat between them, delicate and monstrous. Around them, the memorial continued, laughter trimmed thin by grief. Glasses touching. Footsteps over marble. Rowan wanted. Absurdly. For Adrian to deny everything before he asked. No, Rowan said. No one said anything important. Adrian accepted that because accepting silence had always been easier than entering it. He turned back toward the rain. Rowan stood beside him until the banquet ended. Close enough for their sleeves to nearly touch. Far enough from tenderness. Near midnight. They returned to the Vale residence in the back seat of a black car. Rain ran over the windows, dividing the city lights into broken gold. Adrian removed his gloves and closed his eyes. Rowan watched him in the reflection. How long did you know Elias? Rowan asked. Adrian's eyes opened. The silence that followed was caution. Not surprise. Why ask tonight? I realized I know very little about him. There is nothing useful to know. Useful. Rowan felt the word land with surgical precision. Was he kind? Adrian looked out the window. Yes. Did you love him? Rain struck the roof patiently. Adrian's profile remained carved from shadow. But Rowan saw the muscle near his jaw tighten. He is dead. Adrian said. It was not an answer. It was a door closing. Rowan folded his hands in his lap. The watch on his left wrist reflected a thin line of streetlight. Adrian had given it to him on their first anniversary, though neither of them had called it that. A vintage silver watch with a moon-white face. Adrian had fastened it around Rowan's wrist himself. Rowan had worn it every day since. At the time, he had thought the gift meant Adrian saw him. Now he wondered whose time he had been keeping. When they reached the house, Adrian went directly to his study. Rowan climbed the stairs alone. The east room waited at the end of the hall, white curtains moving in the draught. Antique desk polished, dark beneath the lamp. For years, he had slept there whenever Adrian worked late. Telling himself it felt less lonely than the master bedroom. Rowan stood in the center of the room until memory rearranged itself. The desk, the curtains, the narrow bookshelf filled with poetry he had never selected, the small crystal bottle of winter iris still unopened in the drawer because Adrian had never mentioned it again. His hands did not shake when he opened the bottom drawer. Perhaps some part of him had always known where grief hid its relics. The first photograph showed Elias seated by the same window, wearing a pale sweater, one hand resting on the antique desk. The second showed him laughing beneath the white curtains. In the third, he stood beside Adrian at a winter charity event, his wrist turned toward the camera. The silver watch gleamed clearly. Rowan closed the album. Downstairs. The study door opened. Adrian's footsteps approached the corridor with their usual measured weight. Rowan did not hide the album. By the time Adrian entered the room, Rowan had placed the photograph on the desk and was standing beside it like someone waiting for a verdict already delivered. Adrian stopped. For the first time that night, something unguarded crossed his face. Not guilt exactly. Recognition. Rowan touched the watch on his wrist. His voice was quiet enough that the rain nearly swallowed it. Am I only his replacement? Adrian looked at the photograph, then at him. The room held its breath. Outside, rain struck the glass with soft, relentless fingers. Rowan waited through 1 second, then 5, then 10. In all the years he had loved this man, Rowan had learned Adrian's silences. Anger was short. Displeasure was cold. Grief was distant. This silence was gentle enough to kill. Rowan, Adrian said at last. Only his name, nothing before it, nothing after. Rowan nodded once. Not because he understood, but because understanding was no longer necessary. He removed the watch carefully. The clasp resisted, as if habit itself wished to keep him bound. When it opened, the skin beneath looked pale and bare, marked by years of loyalty. He placed the watch beside Elias's photograph. Adrian took 1 step forward. It is late. We will discuss this tomorrow. Tomorrow. Adrian still believed time could be commanded. He believed conversations waited because he had never been the one left waiting. There is nothing to discuss tonight, Rowan said. Adrian's eyes darkened. Do not make decisions while you are upset. Rowan almost laughed. But the sound would have been too close to grief. I have made every decision calmly. That was the problem. He left the room before Adrian could answer. In the hallway, the house smelled faintly of cedar, rain, and the lilies someone had sent back from the banquet. At dawn, while the sky softened to iron grey, Rowan placed a folded note on the bedside table. He did not write an accusation. He did not write goodbye. 1 sentence remained. I am returning what was never mine. By the time Adrian opened the bedroom door, the watch was there, cold, beside the lamp. The east room was immaculate. The bottle of winter iris sat unopened on the dresser. Rowan's side of the wardrobe had been emptied so carefully that the absence looked almost merciful. Outside, the rain had stopped. But the house, for the first time, felt drowned. The first thing Adrian noticed was not the note, but the cold kettle. It sat on the low table outside his study, untouched, silver-bodied dull beneath the morning light. For 4 years, whenever Adrian worked past midnight, Rowan left tea there before dawn, never too strong, never too sweet, always warm enough that he could drink it without thinking. Adrian had never asked for it. Rowan had never mentioned it. Like most things between them, it had survived by pretending not to matter. This morning, there was no cup, no folded napkin, no faint trace of omega scent beneath the house's sterile order. Adrian stood before the table for a long time, the note unopened in his hand. From the corridor, the housekeeper watched without speaking. She had served the Vale family long enough to recognize silence as weather. If Mr. Vale was angry, the air sharpened. If he was displeased, the servants disappeared. But this was stranger. He looked at the cold kettle as if it had betrayed him. "Where is Rowan?" he asked. The housekeeper lowered her head. Mr. Lynn left before dawn. "With whom?" "Alone." "There." He asked that no one be woken. Adrian's fingers tightened around the note until the paper bent down the middle. "Prepare the car." But even after she left, he did not move. He opened the note only when the hallway was empty again. "I am returning what was never mine." There were no accusations beneath it. No pleading. No explanation. No trace of the years Rowan had spent arranging himself into the shape of Adrian's convenience. That restraint was so familiar Adrian almost missed its cruelty. Rowan had always known how to leave no mess behind. Even his wounds were disciplined. He told himself Rowan had gone somewhere close. A friend's apartment. Perhaps. A hotel where he could be found within an hour. Rowan was hurt. Hurt people made symbolic gestures a night away. A returned watch. A sentence written with too much calm. These were not departures. They were demands to be noticed. The thought steadied him until he entered the East Room again. The curtains had been tied back. The antique desk was empty. The bottle of winter iris remained on the dresser, catching a blade of pale sun. Beside it lay the silver watch. Adrian picked it up. For years, he had seen the watch on Rowan's wrist without seeing it. At dinners, during receptions. Beside his bed, when Rowan loosened his cufflinks after midnight, it had become part of Rowan's body in Adrian's mind. A quiet gleam at the edge of movement. Now, without warmth, the metal looked obscene. He remembered buying it after Camille mentioned Elias had admired the same model. At the time, Adrian had felt nothing like tenderness. Rowan had entered his life with lowered eyes and capable hands. The watch had seemed appropriate. Appropriate. Adrian closed his fist around it. His phone rang. Camille's name glowed across the screen. "I heard he left," she said. "Do not chase him in daylight. It will create talk." Adrian looked toward the white curtains. Who told him about Elias's room? Did he ask? That is not what I asked. Adrian. Grief makes people territorial. If Rowan stumbled across something and chose to dramatize it, let him cool down. He is sensible. Sensible people return when they remember where safety comes from. Safety. The word passed through him like a needle. Had Rowan felt safe here, the house had guarded him, clothed him, fed him, placed cars and staff at his disposal. No one had touched him without permission. Adrian had made certain of that with the same efficiency he used to close hostile acquisitions. Yet last night, when Rowan asked a single question, Adrian had given him silence. "I want no one from the family contacting him," Adrian said. Camille's voice thinned. "You are making this larger than it is." It became large before I noticed. He ended the call. Across the city, Rowan signed his resignation with a black pen that left no tremor in the ink. The foundation office occupied the top floor of one of Adrian's older buildings. All clean glass, and restrained wealth. Rowan had managed its restoration grants for 3 years, building relationships with museums, small studios, and old families too proud to admit they needed funding. Officially, he had been Adrian Vale's spouse lending grace to philanthropy. Unofficially, he had been the reason half the project survived. The director, Mariana Cho, stared at the resignation letter as if Rowan had placed a blade on her desk. "You could take leave instead," she said. "A month. 2 months. I can speak to Mr. Vale." "No. If this is personal, the foundation does not need to become collateral damage." "It will not." Rowan placed a second folder beside the first. Transfer notes, donors, deadlines, problem accounts, restoration stages. Professor Albright will threaten to withdraw if the archive access is delayed, but a formal apology will satisfy him. Despite herself, Marianne opened the folder. It was indexed, color-tabbed. Perfect. Rowan had spent the last week making sure his departure would inconvenience no one more than necessary. "You planned this," Marianne murmured. Rowan's smile was faint. "I learned from the best." She understood the name he did not say. The room became briefly awkward with all the things civilized people were trained not to witness. "Where will you go?" "I have been accepted into the Halden Art Restoration Program. It begins next month." Overseas, Marianne's brows rose. "Does Mr. Vale know?" Rowan recapped the pen. "He knows many things." That afternoon, he cancelled the appointments that had once shaped his life around Adrian's schedule, suppressant consultations near Adrian's ruts, formal fittings before shareholder dinners, a pheromone regulation check he had attended alone every season because Adrian disliked the clinical smell of Omega hospitals. By evening, Rowan returned to the small apartment he had rented 2 years ago and never used. It sat above a closed bookshop in the old district. Narrow windows facing a street of wet stone and crooked lamps. The heating rattled. The elevator did not work. The kitchen contained 1 chipped mug and a kettle that screamed when boiled. For the first time in years, no one waited for him to be quiet. His phone buzzed once. Adrian Vale. Rowan watched the screen until it went dark. A second call came, then a third. When the fourth began, he turned the phone face down and unpacked his clothes. At the Vale residence, Adrian opened the foundation system and found Rowan's resignation uploaded at 3:17 p.m. Then he read the transfer notes. Page after page of Rowan's work unfolded with brutal precision. Names Adrian had never bothered to remember. Crises Rowan had handled before they reached him. Donor relationships maintained through handwritten letters. Late-night calls. Gentle compromises. The foundation Adrian had funded as an ornament had been alive in Rowan's hands. At the bottom of the final document was a sentence. "All personal involvement from Rowan Lynn ends effective immediately." Personal involvement. Adrian leaned back slowly. The watch lay beside his keyboard, polished face reflecting the ceiling light. He had believed he was the center around which Rowan arranged his life. Only now, seeing the architecture Rowan had built in silence, did he realize he had mistaken quietness for emptiness. The next morning, he found Rowan at the apartment above the bookshop. The neighborhood disliked luxury cars. His black sedan looked absurd beneath the laundry lines and aging balconies. Adrian climbed 3 flights because the elevator was broken. By the time Rowan opened the door, he had already noticed the cheap lock, thin walls, and unguarded hallway. Rowan wore a grey sweater, sleeves pushed to his wrists. Without the watch, his left hand looked naked. "How did you find me?" "You used your own name." "I was not hiding." That answer struck harder than defiance. Adrian looked past him, into the apartment, 1 suitcase. Stacked books, A kettle on the stove. No comfort except a folded wool blanket. You cannot stay here. I can. It is unsafe. It has a lock. Rowan. He stepped back from the doorway. Not enough to invite Adrian in. You are used to giving instructions and mistaking compliance for agreement. I am trying to break the habit for both of us. Adrian's gaze fixed on him. Come home. Rowan looked at him for a long moment. Which one? Adrian knew that he had no answer that would not condemn him. The Vale residence, the East Room, the bedroom where Rowan had learned to sleep lightly beside a man who never reached for him first. The house that had made space for a ghost and called it shelter. I will have the room changed, Adrian said. Rowan's expression moved almost imperceptibly. It was not anger. Disappointment. Perhaps. But old enough to be gentle. You still think the room is the injury. Adrian's control tightened. Then tell me what you want. If I have to teach you what was taken from me, it means you are not ready to return it. Below them, a door opened and shut. Ordinary life moved around the stairwell, indifferent to the quiet ruin occurring on the third floor. Adrian stepped closer. You are leaving for Halden. Yes. No. The word came out before he could refine it into something less naked. Rowan's eyes lifted. No. You will not go overseas alone because of a misunderstanding. For the first time, Rowan's calm cracked at the edge. He had endured comparison. Silence. Absence. And a dead man's belongings with that same composed face. It was the word misunderstanding that wounded him. Do not reduce my life to a reaction, Rowan said. I applied 6 months ago. Adrian went still. 6 months. Rowan repeated softly. I wanted to know whether there was a version of me outside your house. I was afraid there wasn't. The admission should have invited comfort. Neither of them knew how to offer it. Adrian's hand moved slightly, then stopped before it could cross the space between them. You should have told me. I tried once. Rowan lowered his gaze to Adrian's cufflink, perfectly fastened without his help. You said overseas programs were inconvenient and asked me to reschedule the charity auction. Memory returned, precise and merciless. Adrian had been signing documents. Rowan had stood at the edge of his desk with a brochure in hand. Adrian had not looked up. I am telling you now, Rowan said. I am going. Adrian left without touching him. Pride carried him down the first flight. Anger carried him down the second. By the time he reached the street, neither was strong enough to keep him from looking back. Rowan stood at the third-floor window. He did not wave. He did not hide. That night, Adrian returned late to the Vale residence. The servants had left lights on as usual, but the house no longer knew how to pretend. He walked past the East Room and stopped before the main bedroom, where Rowan had kept only the belongings suitable for public life formal suits. Winter coats. Silk scarves Adrian had chosen without asking what colors he liked. The wardrobe door stood slightly open. Adrian crossed the room and pulled it wider. Half the closet was empty. Not carelessly emptied. Rowan had left behind everything Adrian had bought because it matched the Vale image. The dark formal wear, the cufflinks, the pale scarves, the coats tailored for banquets and memorials and photographs beside a man who never explained him. What was missing were the ordinary things Adrian had never noticed: worn sweaters, soft shirts, a blue coat with repaired lining, shoes scuffed at the heel. Rowan had not taken what Adrian gave him. He had taken only himself. For the first time since Elias died, Adrian Vale sat down in the dark and did not know which ghost he was mourning. Rowan learned quickly that disappearance was not the same as freedom. Freedom had practical inconveniences. The old apartment's heating woke before dawn with a metallic shudder. The bookshop downstairs opened at 10, and closed whenever its owner's arthritis began to ache. Rainwater gathered along the window frame and had to be wiped away with a folded towel. The kettle screamed too loudly. The mattress was too thin. The stairwell smelled of dust, old paper, and someone's cabbage soup. Still, every morning, Rowan woke to a room that had not been arranged by another person's grief. That alone felt extravagant. On the third day, after leaving the Vale residence, he stood before the cracked bathroom mirror and fastened the last button of a plain white shirt. No cufflinks, no silver watch, no perfume chosen because a dead Omega had once worn it beautifully. His wrist still bore a faint pale band where the watch had rested for years. And when the light touched it, he had the absurd feeling of looking at a healed injury that had not stopped hurting. His phone remained mostly silent now. Adrian had stopped calling after the first 27 attempts. Rowan knew the exact number because restraint had not cured him of weakness. He had watched each call appear, had let each one pass through him like weather over a closed window. At 9, he left for the restoration studio. The place occupied the second floor of a former textile warehouse near the river. It lacked the polished severity of Vale-funded institutions. Its brick walls were uneven, its elevator temperamental, and every worktable bore the scars of labor varnish stains. Knife marks, pale rings from tea mugs. Sunlight entered through tall windows in dusty sheets. Nothing here was immaculate. Everything here was being repaired. Careful. A voice called as Rowan entered. The floorboard near the cabinet still thinks murder is reasonable. Rowan stepped over the loose board and looked up. Julian Reed stood beside a large canvas. Sleeves rolled to his elbows. Dark hair tied carelessly at the nape of his neck. He was an alpha, though not the kind Rowan had been trained to fear in banquet halls. His presence was warm rather than oppressive. His pheromones, well contained beneath a faint scent of green tea and turpentine. He had been assigned as Rowan's temporary supervisor until the Halden program finalized his overseas placement. "You are early again," Julian said. "I live close. You also look like someone who believes sleep is optional." Rowan placed his bag beneath the work table. "That sounds inefficient." Julian laughed. Not loudly, but with enough ease to make the room feel briefly younger. "Good. You can still make jokes. I was worried the rich had carved that out of you." Rowan's hands paused over his gloves. Julian saw too much. Perhaps all restorers did. They spent their lives studying damage beneath varnish, learning where time had been disguised by careful hands. "I apologize," Julian said after a moment. "Softer. That was careless." "No." Rowan drew on the gloves. It was accurate. They worked on a storm-damaged portrait from an old coastal estate, a woman in blue silk whose face had been nearly erased by mildew and neglect. Rowan cleaned the surface in patient increments. Cotton swab moving in circles no larger than a coin. Under the yellowed varnish, color returned slowly. Not new. Never new. Restoration, his instructor once told him, was not resurrection. It was permission for what remained to be seen clearly. By noon, Rowan had forgotten to check his phone. Across the city, Adrian noticed that Rowan had not replied to the message sent that morning. The message itself was simple: "I will send someone to repair the apartment lock." It had not been a request. Adrian realized that only after sending it. He read it again during a board presentation. The glowing figures on the screen blurring into a language he usually understood better than speech. The directors spoke. Adrian nodded at intervals, precise enough to maintain terror. Inside his pocket, his phone remained mute. He typed, "Tell me what you need." He deleted it. He typed, "Come to dinner. We should speak properly." He deleted that too. No one in the room knew that Adrian Vale, who had negotiated billion-dollar mergers without raising his voice, was losing to an unanswered message about a door lock. By evening, 3 packages were returned to the Vale residence. The first contained the formal coats Adrian had bought for Rowan over the years. The second contained jewelry, accessories, silk scarves, and a platinum card cut cleanly in half. The third was smaller. Inside lay the unopened bottle of winter iris, wrapped in tissue paper without a note. Adrian stood before the packages in the entrance hall until the servants stopped pretending not to see him. Then he carried the perfume upstairs himself and placed it in the east room, where its glass body looked suddenly vulgar among all the pale and careful things. Camille came the next morning. She entered without waiting, as she always had, dressed in pearl grey wool and family authority. This has gone far enough. Adrian was in the study. He had not gone home because home had become a word with no fixed location. Documents lay open before him. None read past the first page. Leave him alone. Do not speak as though I am the one who drove him out. Camille's heels clicked once against the floor. You indulged him with too much ambiguity. Now he mistakes hurt feelings for leverage. Adrian's gaze lifted slowly. What did you say to him that night? What everyone else had the courtesy not to say aloud. She leaned one gloved hand on the chair opposite him. Rowan is not stupid. That is precisely why he should understand his position. You gave him protection, status, a name beside yours. Do you think an Omega with no family backing receives such things for free? The words should have been familiar. They belonged to the world Adrian had inherited value weighed against utility. Emotion translated into debt. He had spoken versions of them himself, with less elegance and more damage. He did not receive them for free. Adrian said, he paid for them. Camille's expression flickered. He paid in silence. Adrian continued. In labor, no one credited to him. In years of standing beside a man who did not answer a simple question, you are sentimental because he left. Perhaps, his voice went quieter. Then I should have become sentimental earlier. Camille studied him. For the first time, she looked uncertain, not because Rowan mattered to her, but because Adrian's grief had shifted beyond the lines she knew how to manage. At the studio, Rowan sneezed because Julian had opened a cabinet full of century-old dust. Bless you, Julian said. You say that as if I have survived something dramatic. With the amount of mold in this place, you may have. Rowan smiled before he could stop himself. It was a small expression, unused and brief. Julian noticed but did not reward it with surprise. That restraint made Rowan grateful. Your technique is careful, Julian said later, bending over Rowan's work. Almost too careful. I was taught not to damage what does not belong to me. Useful principle. Julian looked at the half-revealed portrait. Dangerous way to live. Rowan did not answer. The studio windows reflected a dark car parked across the street. Adrian sat in the back seat and watched Rowan smile at another alpha. The smile lasted less than 2 seconds. It was nothing like the public expression Rowan wore at Vale events. That polished courtesy designed to make wealthy people feel safe. This was smaller, almost involuntary. The corner of his mouth lifting as if some locked room inside him had opened a window. Adrian had never seen it before. That knowledge struck with unreasonable force. Rowan could smile. Adrian had known that in the abstract. But the smiles he gave guests and donors had been offerings, performed with elegance and removed afterward. The one he gave Julian Reed remained in Adrian's mind because it had not been offered to anyone. It had escaped. Jealousy rose first, sharp and humiliating. Then fear followed, deeper and uglier. For years, Adrian had believed Rowan's quietness belonged to him. Now he understood that he had owned only the quietness Rowan used for survival. The parts that might have been real had gone elsewhere to breathe. Sir, The driver said carefully. "Shall I wait?" Adrian looked away from the window. No. Yet he did not instruct the car to leave for another full minute. That evening, Victor Hale visited Rowan under the excuse of delivering an old commission file from the Voss estate. Rowan recognized him from memorial banquets, Elias's older brother. Handsome in a tired, precise way, with eyes that seemed kind until they stayed too long on weakness. He carried grief as one carried a well-maintained weapon. "I hope I am not intruding," Victor said. "Marianne told me you had begun work here. The Voss family has several pieces under independent review. I thought it better to hand them over personally." Rowan accepted the folder without inviting him inside the studio office. "Thank you." Victor glanced at his bare wrist. "You returned the watch." Rowan's fingers tightened around the file. "I am sorry," Victor said. "That was inappropriate." "It was observant. My family has survived on observation." His smile was mild. "Elias was softer than the rest of us. That is why they loved him. Also why they ruined him." Rowan should have ended the conversation there. Instead, he heard himself ask, "Adrian." Victor's expression did not change, but the pause before he answered felt chosen. "Adrian destroys differently from cruel men. Cruel men enjoy the wound. Adrian does not look at it long enough to call it cruelty." The corridor outside smelled of rain-damp wool and turpentine. Rowan thought of Adrian standing in the East Room, silent before a question that had already consumed years of Rowan's life. "Elias loved him," Rowan asked. Victor looked toward the windows. Everyone believed so. Belief is convenient when the families need it to be. He returned his gaze to Rowan. "You resemble him less than people say, but you have the same mistake in your eyes." "What mistake?" "You waited for Adrian Vale to become gentle because he suffered." Victor's voice softened. "Suffering does not purify people. Sometimes it only teaches them which excuses work." There was truth in it. That was what made it dangerous. Rowan had lived long enough among polished people to know manipulation rarely arrived as a lie. It arrived as a truth angled towards someone else's purpose. "Why tell me this?" he asked. "Because no one told Elias until it was too late." Rowan studied him, then closed the folder. "I am not Elias." For the first time, Victor's smile faltered, only slightly. "No, perhaps that is why you may survive." After he left, Rowan stood by the window until the streetlights blurred through rain. He did not know whether Victor had come to warn him or use him. He only knew Adrian's shadow had followed him even here, stretching across the one room where he had begun to recognize his own hands. At midnight, Adrian received a package at the Vale residence. It had no sender's name, only his office address written in black ink, the handwriting elegant enough to feel staged. Inside was a sealed file tied with grey ribbon. On the first page, beneath the yellowed copy of an old police report, someone had written a single sentence. "Ask Rowan what he knows about the night Elias died." Adrian read it once, then again. Outside, rain began to fall against the windows, soft as fingers tapping on glass. The file did not accuse. It arranged. Adrian understood that kind of cruelty. A direct accusation could be rejected, challenged, disproved. This file was built from fragments that made denial feel childish. Hospital admission logs, police summaries, family statements, blurred photographs of rain-slick asphalt, and a copy of Elias Voss's last recorded call. Someone had selected each page with patience. Someone wanted him to see not only the night Elias died, but the places where memory had been cut and resewn. He read until dawn without removing his coat. The study lamp burned over the papers, turning the old ink the color of dried blood. Twice. He reached for the silver watch beside the keyboard, then stopped before touching it. Rowan's bare wrist returned to him with unbearable clarity. There were absences that accused more sharply than evidence. At 7, Adrian called his private investigator. By noon, the city had become a map of sealed doors opening too late. The retired officer who handled Elias's accident report now lived outside the capital in a small house surrounded by winter-bare trees. The hospital administrator who signed the amended record had remarried under a different surname. A former Vale driver, paid generously for silence, still kept the habit of looking over his shoulder before answering simple questions. None of them confessed immediately. Adrian did not need confession. He only needed the pauses. The old officer spoke first when Adrian placed the unaltered traffic camera still on the table between them. In the original report, Elias had been alone in the car. In the image, another figure stood near the passenger door, half hidden by rain and headlights. Your aunt handled the family side, the officer said, eyes fixed on his untouched tea. The Voss family agreed. They said the boy's reputation mattered. They said there was no need to complicate grief. Who was with him? The officer swallowed. Not you. Adrian had known that before asking. Still, hearing it shaped the room differently. For 5 years, the world had treated Elias's death as a tragedy orbiting him. Adrian Vale, the cold alpha fiancé who survived. Adrian Vale, the man whose grief had turned him unreachable. Adrian Vale, the one Elias supposedly loved enough to drive through a storm to see. A clean story. A useful story. Who Adrian repeated. The officer looked older with every breath. An Omega named Noel Hart. He disappeared after the accident. The families kept him out of the report. Noel Hart. The name meant nothing to Adrian. And because it meant nothing, something inside him gave way. At the Vale residence, Camille received him in the morning room beneath a painting of pale hunting dogs. She had always preferred rooms with ancestry watching. Perhaps judgment felt friendlier when inherited. On the tea table lay the sealed file. Adrian did not sit. You lied, he said. Camille lifted her cup, her hands steady. About which part families survive on selective truth. You will need to be more specific. Elias was not coming to see me. No. He loved someone else. Yes. The simplicity was worse than resistance. Adrian had expected defense. Perhaps anger. Camille gave him confirmation with the weary impatience of someone correcting a child who had asked why the sky was blue. Why, he asked. Because dead children become symbols if the living are disciplined enough. Camille set down the cup. The Voss family could not allow their heir to be remembered as an Omega running away with a nobody. Your grandfather could not allow the broken engagement to become public. You were abroad closing the Merrow acquisition. Unreachable for 6 hours. By the time you returned, grief had already been arranged. Adrian stared at her. Arranged. You needed something to mourn. They needed something respectable to bury. Camille's gaze sharpened. Do not pretend you resisted. You accepted every condolence. You let the world believe Elias died because of you, because guilt suited you better than irrelevance. For a moment, the room lost sound. Adrian remembered the funeral, white lilies, black coats, Victor Hale's hand on his shoulder, reporters waiting beyond the gates. He remembered Camille telling him not to correct anyone while emotions were raw. Later, correction became unnecessary. Later, the story hardened around him, and he found that being blamed was easier than admitting he had not mattered most. The truth did not cleanse him. It made him smaller. You put Rowan in that room, Adrian said. Camille's expression cooled. You allowed it. The sentence did not strike like an insult. It struck like law. Adrian left without another word. On the drive back through the rain, his phone displayed an update from the investigator, supplementary material recovered from private security archive. Attached was a video file from a charity attack 3 years before Adrian formally married Rowan. One he had remembered only as smoke, broken glass, and a hand pressing cloth against his bleeding side. He watched it in the car. The footage was grainy, filmed from a service corridor. Adrian, younger by 6 years, stumbled through a side exit after a hostile business faction set off a small fire to cover an attempted assault. He had always believed Elias had found him first because, when he woke later, someone told him an Omega with a pale coat had stayed until help arrived. Camille had placed a photograph of Elias beside the hospital bed afterward, saying softly that some debts could never be repaid. In the footage, the Omega kneeling beside him was not Elias. Rowan was thinner then, dressed in a waiter's black uniform beneath a borrowed pale coat. His hair was wet from the sprinkler system. He pressed a folded napkin against Adrian's wound with both hands, face bloodless but calm. When Adrian tried to rise, Rowan leaned closer and said something the camera could not record. Then the rescuers arrived. Rowan stepped back before anyone looked at him properly, vanishing into smoke like a person trained not to occupy space. Adrian watched the clip 3 times. Not Elias. Rowan. The kindness he had folded into the wrong memory. The quiet hand he had buried under a dead man's name. Adrian closed his eyes, and every year of Rowan standing beside him rearranged itself into indictment. Rowan fixing his cuff. Rowan remembering meetings. Rowan leaving tea. Rowan asking once about an overseas program while Adrian signed documents without looking up. He had not failed to recognize love, because love was hidden. He had failed because it arrived without drama, without demand, without resemblance to the grief he preferred. At the studio, Rowan was repairing the blue silk woman's left hand when Adrian came. Rain had followed him indoors, darkening his shoulders. Julian glanced up from the next table, his posture changing with the instinctive awareness of one alpha measuring another. The studio quieted, not dramatically, but enough that brushes slowed and conversations thinned. Rowan did not look surprised. That hurt Adrian. 2. May we speak? Adrian asked. Julian set down his tool. Rowan touched 2 fingers lightly to the edge of the canvas, as if steadying the damaged woman before leaving her. In the office smelled of paper, varnish, and old radiator heat. Its window looked over the river, where rain broke the surface into restless silver. Rowan stood by the desk instead of sitting. Adrian remained near the door. Distance had become the only courtesy he knew Rowan might accept. I found the original accident report, Adrian said. Elias was not coming to me that night. Rowan's lashes lowered once. I know. The words were quiet, not confession, weariness. Adrian's throat tightened. Victor told you. He implied enough. I confirmed what I could. Rowan's fingers rested on the desk, relaxed but colorless at the knuckles. It was not difficult. People speak carelessly around those they underestimate. You should have told me. A faint expression crossed Rowan's face. It was almost pity. And become what the Omega who dragged a dead man out of his grave to prove I was not a shadow. Adrian had no answer. Rowan looked toward the river. For a while, I thought the truth would free me. Then I realized it would only give you another reason to look at me. Gratitude, guilt, correction. None of them are love. I was tired of being loved through accidents. The office seemed to narrow around that sentence. Adrian took the small drive from his coat pocket and placed it on the desk. There is more, he said. 6 years ago, after the Merrow incident, you helped me. Rowan's eyes shifted to the drive. For the first time, composure deserted him in a visible way. Not much. Only the smallest breath caught in the wrong place. You remember now, he said. No. Adrian's voice roughened. That is the point. I did not remember. I let someone else give your kindness another name. Rowan's face became still again. But the stillness had effort in it. I was working that night. You were bleeding. Anyone would have helped. Not anyone stayed. I left before you woke. Why? Because people like me are not supposed to be found in stories about people like you. Rowan's gaze returned to him. I was 21. I had rent due, a sick mother, and a supervisor who would dock my pay if I missed cleanup. You were Adrian Vale. Helping you was dangerous even before I knew your name. Adrian stepped forward, then stopped when Rowan's shoulders tightened. That small reaction disciplined him more effectively than any command. I remembered the wrong person, he said. Rowan looked at him. The rain softened behind the glass. A grey curtain between the office and the city. His expression was not cruel. That made it impossible to defend against. No, Rowan said. You chose the easier memory. Adrian felt the words enter him without resistance. They were not spoken to punish. Rowan no longer needed punishment. He was simply returning reality to its owner. I am sorry, Adrian said. Rowan's smile was faint and exhausted. I know. That, too, was not forgiveness. When Adrian left the studio, Victor Hale was waiting beneath the awning across the street. He held a black umbrella and wore grief like a tailored coat. Adrian crossed the wet pavement without looking away. You sent the file, Adrian said. Victor smiled. I thought truth was overdue. You wanted damage. I wanted balance. Victor's eyes hardened. Your family buried Elias correctly and let the living rot. Did you think Rowan would be spared because you finally noticed his name? Adrian's expression did not change. Do not use him. Everyone has used him. I arrived late. By evening, the first article appeared online. Its headline was cautious enough to seem credible. Questions surround Adrian Vale's Omega partner and the legacy of Elias Voss. By midnight, the cautious headline had become bloodier in reposts. Anonymous sources claimed Rowan Lynn had deliberately imitated Elias to enter Adrian's life. Others suggested he had exploited a grieving alpha, manipulated a foundation position, and profited from a dead Omega's memory. Rowan read none of it at first. He was still in the studio, alone beneath the yellow desk lamp, repairing a damaged hand on a woman painted 2 centuries ago. His phone began to vibrate beside the canvas. Once, then again, then continuously. Outside, rain struck the windows harder. Across the city, Adrian opened the article and saw Rowan's name placed beside Elias's like an accusation. For the first time in years, his anger found the correct target. By morning, Rowan's name had become public property. It appeared in headlines, comment sections, private group chats, and forwarded messages from people who had once accepted his careful smiles at charity dinners. The accusations changed shape every hour. At 7, he was an ambitious Omega who had imitated a dead man to seduce a grieving alpha. At 9, he was a social climber who had stolen foundation resources. By noon, someone had enlarged an old banquet photograph and circled his face beside Elias's, as though resemblance itself were evidence of guilt. The studio tried to continue working. Brushes moved. Solvents opened. A cracked saint from an abandoned chapel waited beneath a lamp, half-cleaned and patient. Yet every phone vibration made someone glance toward Rowan. Julian was the first to turn his phone off. Everyone else, he said, voice calm enough to become an order. Do the same. If a client calls, I will answer from the office line. No one objected. They had all seen Rowan arrive before dawn with his collar buttoned wrong and his face too composed. Composure, in that room of restorers, was understood as a surface treatment. It preserved what was underneath only temporarily. Rowan sat before the blue silk portrait and tried to continue working. His cotton swab touched the painted hand, then stopped. The woman's fingers were still damaged. 4 centuries of neglect breaking through the pigment. He had meant to repair her today. Instead, he stared at the missing places and wondered why ruin always invited strangers to name it. "You do not have to stay," Julian said beside him. Rowan did not look up. "If I leave every place where they speak about me, there will be nowhere left." "That sounds practiced." "It is." Julian said nothing for a while. Outside, rain gathered against the tall windows, not yet falling, only threatening. The city had entered that suspended grey hour when even glass seemed tired. Then the office line rang. Julian answered. His expression altered almost imperceptibly. "No comment," he said, and hung up. It rang again before his hand left the receiver. Across the city, Adrian entered the emergency board meeting without greeting anyone. 12 directors sat around the long black table. Legal counsel occupied the wall seats. Public relations had prepared 3 statements in different degrees of cowardice. Camille sat near the head of the table in pearl grey again, her posture flawless, her face arranged into sorrowful concern. Victor Hale was not present, but his fingerprints lay across every screen in the room. Adrian remained standing. The senior director cleared his throat. "The situation is escalating. We advise immediate distance from Mr. Lin until the allegations can be assessed. A temporary separation statement would protect both the company and—" "No." The word was quiet. It ended the sentence anyway. Another director tried. "Adrian, public sentiment is dangerous. The suggestion that your Omega partner exploited Elias Voss's death has revived old questions. Investors are already asking whether the foundation funds were mismanaged under his supervision. They were not. Perception matters." Adrian looked at him, then perceived this accurately. Rowan Lin built that foundation's restoration division, while most of you used it for photographs. Silence moved around the table, brittle and embarrassed. Camille folded her hands. No one is questioning Rowan's usefulness. Adrian's eyes turned to her. That has always been the problem. For the first time, legal counsel stopped taking notes. Adrian placed a file on the table. Original accident records, amended reports, transfer logs, and the security footage from 6 years ago. He had not slept. Fatigue had removed the last layer of polish from him, leaving something colder and more dangerous than anger. "At 4 this afternoon," he said, "I will hold a press conference. The company will release verified documents clearing Rowan Lin of all financial allegations. The statement will also acknowledge that the Vale and Voss families concealed facts regarding Elias Voss's death." Camille stood. "You will not." "I will. You will destroy the family name to defend a man who has already left you." Adrian's mouth curved, but it was not a smile. "No, I will tell the truth because he left too late." The room stilled. Camille's face hardened. "You think this is love because it feels like punishment. Do not confuse the two." Adrian gathered the file. "I have spent years confusing worse things." At 4, the press conference began under a sky heavy with rain. Vale Tower's main hall was built to intimidate black stone floor, 30-foot glass walls, a suspended sculpture of fractured silver. Cameras filled the front rows. Reporters spoke in low, hungry voices until Adrian appeared alone at the podium. No public relations director stood beside him. No legal counsel whispered near his shoulder. For once, he had removed every useful shield. He looked into the cameras and did not perform grief. The allegations against Rowan Lynn are false. He said, he did not enter my life by imitating Elias Voss. He did not misuse foundation funds. He did not exploit a death that my family and others chose to misrepresent. The hall changed temperature. Adrian continued before shock could organize itself into noise. He released the foundation audit first, then the records showing Rowan's independent contributions. The projects credited under veil branding, the unpaid labor disguised as social obligation. He did not mention every private cruelty. Some truths belonged to the person wounded by them, but he named enough. When a reporter shouted, "Did Mr. Lynn knowingly benefit from resembling Elias Voss?" Adrian looked directly at the man. "No," he said. "I benefited from his silence. That is not the same thing." Another reporter rose. "Are you admitting the Vale family concealed details about Mr. Voss's death?" "Yes." "Why come forward now?" Adrian gripped the edge of the podium. The cameras caught the movement. Later, people would replay it as proof that even powerful men could bleed without opening skin. "Because I allowed a living person to be measured against a memory," he said. "Because when that person was attacked for my failure, remaining silent would have been another form of violence." No one spoke for 2 seconds. Then the hall erupted. At the studio, Rowan watched the press conference from Julian's office because pretending not to watch had become more exhausting than surrender. The screen showed Adrian beneath white lights, severe and unsheltered. He looked thinner. Or perhaps Rowan was only seeing the absence of certainty. Every sentence he spoke placed another crack through the image the Vale family had protected for years. The stock price would fall. The board would panic. Camille would not forgive him. The Voss family would retaliate. Adrian knew all of that. He spoke anyway. Julian stood near the window, giving Rowan the privacy of not being watched. "He is burning quite a lot," he said quietly. Rowan's fingers rested in his lap. Fire is impressive from a distance. And up close, it can still destroy the house. On screen, Adrian left the podium while reporters shouted after him. The broadcast cut to commentary almost immediately. Experts began speaking with clean voices about damage, strategy, reputation, and power. Not one of them knew what it meant to stand in a room decorated for a dead man and realize one's life had been furnished with another person's absence. Rowan turned off the screen. Rain began at dusk. It fell hard, as if the suspended weather of the day had finally lost patience. By 7, most of the studio had emptied. Julian offered to walk Rowan home. Rowan declined with gratitude. He needed the walk, the wet air, the proof that his body could still move through a city, speaking his name without collapsing. He had just locked the studio door when he saw Adrian across the street. The rain had already soaked through his coat. He stood beneath the awning's edge, but not under it, as though shelter had become something he no longer had the right to use. There were no bodyguards in sight, no driver at the curb, no black umbrella held by a servant. Only Adrian, rain darkening his hair, face pale beneath the street lamp. Rowan's first emotion was anger, not relief, not tenderness. Anger, clean and startling, rose through him with such force that he nearly laughed. After all the years of swallowing injury into silence, anger felt almost luxurious. It was proof that some part of him had survived untrained. "You should go," Rowan said. Adrian crossed the street slowly. Water splashed beneath his shoes. "I needed to see you." "You needed many things after it became too late." "Yes." The agreement disarmed nothing. Rowan hated him briefly for not defending himself. Reporters had not found the studio yet, but they would. The city loved a scene. Two men standing in rain beneath a street lamp, could become myth by morning if photographed correctly. Rowan looked around, suddenly aware of windows, passing cars. The bookshop owner's nephew smoking under a nearby balcony. "Do not do this here," he said. Adrian stopped an arm's length away. "I do not know where else I am allowed." The sentence entered quietly. It did not ask for pity. But pity was not the danger. Memory was. Rowan remembered Adrian standing at the terrace doors years ago while Rowan adjusted his cuff. Beautiful and unreachable. He remembered his own younger heart mistaking distance for depth. "You cleared my name," Rowan said. "Thank you." "Do not thank me." "Then what do you want?" Adrian looked at him through the rain. For once, the answer did not arrive immediately formed. He struggled with it. And Rowan saw the struggle. Raw and humiliating. "I want to undo it," Adrian said at last. "Every room, every silence. Every time I let you make yourself smaller because it was easier than asking why. You cannot. I know." "Do you?" Rowan's voice broke on the edge. Not loudly, but enough that Adrian flinched. "You keep arriving after the wound and offering proof that it existed. I knew it existed. I lived inside it. You think kneeling now makes you lower than me. But that is easy. Kneeling is easier than being forgiven." Adrian's breath caught. Then, in the rain, before the closed studio and the dark windows of the old district, Adrian Vale knelt. It was not graceful. His coat struck the wet pavement heavily. Water splashed against his knees. For a second, Rowan could not move. The image was too violently wrong, the alpha who had built rooms from command and silence now lowered beneath him. Not as spectacle, not as strategy, but because standing had become another lie. "Get up," Rowan said. Adrian bowed his head. "Not until you understand that I am not asking you to return." "Then what are you asking?" "To be allowed to regret without making you responsible for comforting me." His voice was low, nearly lost beneath the rain. "To tell you the truth when you are ready. To wait if waiting is all that remains." Rowan's hands trembled. He hated that they did. He had imagined this moment once. In smaller and more shameful dreams, Adrian realizing, Adrian begging, Adrian choosing him before a crowd. In those dreams, Rowan had always been cruel enough to walk away untouched. Reality was worse. Adrian kneeling did not heal him. It only revealed how deeply he had wanted the impossible. "I loved you," Rowan said. "I loved you until I forgot what I sounded like." Adrian closed his eyes. The rain grew harder, striking the pavement until the whole street seemed to whisper, "Then let me spend the rest of my life learning your voice." Adrian said, "It should have been beautiful." It was beautiful. That made it dangerous. Rowan stood above him for another breath. Then another. He let the rain fall on Adrian's bent head. He let the street witness the imbalance break. Not because humiliation was justice, but because some part of him needed to see Adrian remain when there was no dignity left to preserve. Then Rowan opened his umbrella. He stepped forward and held it over Adrian. Adrian looked up slowly. Water ran down his face, indistinguishable from anything more vulnerable. Rowan's expression was pale, exhausted, and not forgiving. "I will hear the full truth," Rowan said. "Not tonight. Not here." Adrian did not move, and after, Rowan's grip tightened around the umbrella handle. "After that, I will decide whether there is anything left that belongs to me." He turned first, leaving the umbrella in Adrian's hand. Adrian remained kneeling in the rain long after Rowan disappeared up the narrow stairwell, holding the only shelter he had not been permitted to ask for. The truth did not arrive like justice. It arrived like rain after a long drought, darkening everything it touched before anything could grow. For 3 days after the press conference, Vale Tower became a machine of controlled panic. Investors called, directors drafted emergency motions. Reporters camped outside the gates. Camille moved through private rooms with the fury of a woman who had mistaken obedience for permanence. Adrian answered each crisis with a calm so stripped of performance that even his oldest executives began to fear him differently. He signed the first separation order at dawn. 3 family-managed projects were removed from Camille's authority. The Foundation's restoration division was transferred into an independent trust under external supervision. With Rowan's unpaid contributions publicly recorded, a statement followed. Spare and unpolished, the Vale family would cooperate with renewed inquiry into the concealment of facts surrounding Elias Voss's death. Camille came to his office before noon. "You are dismantling your own house," she said. Adrian stood by the window. The city below him washed pale by winter light. "No, I am removing the parts that were never a home." Her mouth tightened. For a moment, age showed through her elegance, not weakness, but exhaustion. "You think Rowan will thank you for this?" "No." "Then why continue?" Adrian looked at the silver watch resting on his desk. He had not worn it. He had not returned it. For days. It had lain there, like a verdict, too small for the damage it carried. Because he should not have to come back for the truth to remain true, he said. Camille studied him for a long time. When she finally left, she did not slam the door. People like her did not need noise to declare war. Yet Adrian felt no triumph after she was gone. Only a hollow quiet. As if he had cut a rope and discovered it had been tied around his own throat too. Victor Hale's downfall was quieter. The leak was traced through an assistant. Then a shell account. Then a legal advisor who had served both the Voss estate and Victor's private interests. Adrian's lawyers wanted to bury him. The board wanted a clean enemy. The press wanted a villain with expensive shoes and grief dark enough to photograph. Rowan, when told, only said, "Do not make him into a monster because it is convenient." Adrian heard the sentence over the phone. Though Rowan had not called him directly, Marianne relayed it after asking whether the Foundation Trust documents could be delivered to the studio. Adrian stood in silence for several seconds before answering. "Tell him I understand." Marianne paused. "Do you?" "No." Adrian said, "But I am learning when not to simplify someone else's pain." Victor had loved Elias in the possessive, helpless way of older siblings who mistake protection for control. He had hated Adrian because hating the most visible survivor was easier than admitting Elias had been lonely long before the accident. He had used Rowan because Rowan stood where Elias's absence hurt most. None of that absolved him. None of it made him unreal. When Victor finally met Rowan outside the studio, he looked less like a weapon than a man who had cut his own hand on the blade. "I wanted Adrian to suffer," Victor said. Rainwater dripped from the awning behind him. "You were simply the path." Rowan held a cardboard tube of restored sketches against his chest. "That is not an apology." "No." Victor's smile was brief and ruined. "I do not think I have earned one." "You have not." Victor nodded. He seemed almost relieved by the plainness. "Elias would have liked you." Rowan looked past him toward the river, where the water carried grey light between old buildings. Once. The sentence might have trapped him. Another comparison, dressed as tenderness. Now it passed through him without finding a wound deep enough to stay. "I hope," Rowan said, "he would have been allowed to like himself." Victor lowered his head. For the first time, he had no answer. Spring came reluctantly. The Halden program offered Rowan a deferred placement after the scandal disrupted his departure. For 2 weeks, he kept the letter folded inside a book and did not answer. The old version of him would have chosen escape simply because staying hurt. The newer version understood that leaving and running could wear the same coat. He wanted a decision that belonged to him, not to Adrian, not to Elias, not to the people who had turned his life into commentary. So he stayed through the first thaw and prepared the exhibition Julian had bullied him into accepting. The centerpiece was the woman in blue silk. Her face had emerged from mildew with solemn beauty, neither young nor old. Her gaze turned slightly aside as though listening to something beyond the frame. Rowan repaired the damaged areas using a visible gold seam technique usually reserved for ceramics. Controversial among traditionalists and beloved by Julian for precisely that reason. The cracks remained. They did not hide the ruin. They made survival part of the portrait's language. On opening night, the studio gallery filled with donors. Critics, artists, curious strangers, and several people who had once pretended not to recognize Rowan at Vale banquets. Now they approached him with careful smiles and compliments, heavy with regret. Rowan accepted them all with a grace that no longer asked permission to exist. Adrian arrived 20 minutes after the opening began. He did not enter like a man claiming space. He came alone, dressed in dark grey instead of black, and stopped near the back wall where the light did not favor him. Several guests noticed. A whisper moved through the room, then faded when he did nothing worth feeding it. He did not approach Rowan. He did not send flowers. He did not announce a donation under his name. He simply stood there and looked at the portrait. Rowan saw him from across the gallery. Of course he did. Some habits did not disappear. They only changed meaning. Adrian's presence still altered the air around him, but tonight it did not command Rowan's body to turn toward him. Rowan finished speaking with an elderly curator, accepted Julian's teasing toast, and answered a critic's question about visible repair. Only when the gallery had emptied and dawn had begun paling the windows did Rowan find Adrian still there. "You stayed," Rowan said. Adrian turned from the painting. His face had lost some of its old severity in the weeks since the press conference. Not softened exactly, but made less perfect by sleepless honesty. "You asked me once to look at what was in front of me. I do not remember asking. You did not use those words." Rowan stood beside him before the portrait. The woman in blue silk looked back at neither of them. Gold traced the fractures along her hand, her shoulder, the edge of her throat. Damage, illuminated carefully, became neither shame nor ornament. It became history. The critics will argue about this technique. Adrian said, "They already have." "Do you mind?" Rowan considered it. "No. I used to think being misunderstood was fatal. It is only inconvenient." Adrian looked at him then, and the quiet between them was different from the old silences. It no longer asked Rowan to vanish. "I withdrew from the Holden placement." Rowan said. Adrian's breath changed. He tried not to show it. And because he tried, Rowan saw. "Because of me." "No." Rowan turned his bare wrist slightly, watching morning light touch the skin where the watch mark had faded. "Because I did not want my first free choice to be an escape. I may apply again next year, or I may not." Adrian nodded once. "I will not ask you to stay." "I know." It was strange how much that meant. They walked through the empty gallery as staff cleaned glasses and folded linens in the next room, near the back. Rowan opened a drawer beneath the reception desk and removed a small box. Inside lay the silver watch. Polished but unworn, Adrian's expression changed before he could stop it. "I'm returning this again," Rowan said, "not because it was never mine, because I no longer need to prove that." Adrian accepted the box with both hands. For a moment, all the rooms and lilies and photographs seemed to gather between them, waiting to see whether they would be obeyed. Then Rowan took out a second box. It was plain cardboard, almost absurd after years of velvet and engraved silver. Inside was a simple watch with a brown leather strap and a clean white face. No family crest. No antique history. No dead Omega's reflection. "I bought this from the bookshop owner downstairs," Rowan said. "His brother repairs old watches badly. But honestly, it loses 2 minutes every day." Adrian looked at it as if Rowan had placed something living in his hand. "You do not have to wear it," Rowan added. Adrian's voice was rough. "May I?" The question small, careful, unnecessary to anyone who had not known them before, settled more deeply than any vow could have. Rowan fastened the watch around Adrian's wrist himself. His fingers brushed Adrian's pulse. Neither of them moved away quickly. But neither turned the touch into a claim. "I still love you," Rowan said, so quietly that only the unfinished morning heard it. "That is not forgiveness. It is only the truth." Adrian did not reach for him. His restraint trembled, but held. "Then I will meet the truth where it stands. I will not live in your house. I know. I will not be your memorial. No. I may reject you tomorrow." Adrian looked at the flawed watch on his wrist, then back at Rowan. "Then tomorrow I will learn how to be rejected by you without turning it into another injury." Rowan's eyes reddened slightly. He hated that tenderness could still hurt so much. He hated more that, for the first time, it did not feel like a trap. Outside, the city woke under a pale sky. They did not kiss in the gallery. That would have made the moment too clean, too simple, too easy for memory to misunderstand later. Instead, Adrian walked Rowan home carrying 2 empty wine crates Julian had forced on him, while Rowan pretended not to notice that the great Adrian Vale looked entirely out of place beneath a crooked old bookshop sign. Weeks became months. They did not return to what they had been. Rowan kept the apartment above the bookshop. Adrian repaired the lock only after asking. And Rowan watched over his shoulder to make sure he did not order a full security renovation instead. They ate dinner every Thursday unless Rowan cancelled. Adrian learned to knock and wait. Rowan learned that answering the door did not mean surrender. Sometimes they argued. Sometimes Rowan's anger arrived late and sharp, triggered by a phrase, a scent, the angle of light on white curtains in a shop window. Adrian learned not to defend himself against wounds he had helped create. On such days, he brought tea and left it outside the apartment door, warm enough to drink, without waiting to be praised. One evening, Rowan laughed in the kitchen because Adrian burned rice badly enough to alarm the smoke detector. The sound startled them both. Adrian looked at him as if the world had shifted half an inch toward mercy. By midsummer, the old watch remained in a drawer at Vale Tower. The new one, inaccurate and plain, stayed on Adrian's wrist. The next heavy rain came in September. Rowan was closing the studio late, the street shining black beneath the lamps, when he found Adrian waiting outside with an umbrella, not kneeling this time, not drenched, not punishing himself for being loved too late. He stood under the rain like an ordinary man who had learned that waiting was not the same as being owed. Rowan paused at the door. Adrian lifted the umbrella slightly. "May I walk you home?" There were so many ghosts that could have answered. The East Room, the lilies, Elias's photograph, the silver watch. The version of Rowan who would have crossed the street too quickly, grateful for any shelter. This Rowan locked the studio door first. He checked the handle, slipped the key into his pocket, and stepped into the rain at his own pace. When he reached Adrian, he did not stand beneath the umbrella immediately. He looked at him, at the flawed watch on his wrist, at the hand holding the shelter without command. Then Rowan moved closer. Their shoulders touched beneath the umbrella. Adrian did not pull him in. Rowan did not pull away. Together, they walked through the rain-washed street, past the bookshop, past the river, past every story that had tried to keep them trapped in grief. There was no kneeling, no ghost between them, no borrowed name waiting at the door, only the sound of rain above them, steady and alive, only two people choosing. At last. The present, the morning after Adrian knelt in the rain, the city woke to a quieter scandal. Not because the storm had ended. It had not. Reporters still gathered beneath Vale Tower with cameras raised like weapons. Investors still called before sunrise. The board still demanded control. Distance. Strategy. A statement that would place Rowan Lynn somewhere outside the circle of damage. But the shape of the story had changed. For the first time, the public was not asking what Rowan had taken from Adrian Vale. They were asking what Adrian Vale had taken from him. Adrian did not mistake that for justice. Justice, he was beginning to understand, did not arrive simply because the crueler headline had turned. Rowan had lived for years in rooms designed by another person's memory. A public correction could clear his name. It could not return the mornings he had spent wearing a watch that belonged to a ghost. So Adrian began where power had first taught him to hide. He cut through the house. Camille's authority over the foundation ended before noon. 3 family-managed trusts were moved to independent oversight. The Restoration Division, once treated as an ornament for the Vale name, was separated from the company and given its own board. Rowan's work was recorded properly: project designs, grant negotiations, donor relationships, emergency interventions. All the invisible labor that wealthy people had praised only when Adrian stood near enough to receive credit. The legal team prepared polished language. Adrian crossed out most of it. "Do not soften it," he said. The senior counsel looked at the page. Then at him. Some phrases expose the family to liability. They should. No one argued after that. By evening, the official statement was released. It did not beg for sympathy. It did not frame Adrian as a grieving man deceived by circumstances. It acknowledged concealment, misattribution, and the misuse of Rowan Lynn's unpaid labor and public role. It named the amended accident records. It confirmed that the foundation audit had found no misconduct by Rowan. It did not say Adrian loved him. Adrian had learned, too late but not uselessly, that love spoken publicly could become another cage if the person being loved had not asked to stand inside it. Camille arrived at his office while the city below flickered with rain-darkened traffic. She wore white today, not mourning white, not innocence, but the color of expensive distance. She stood opposite his desk, looking at the documents spread across it, the discarded drafts, the old silver watch resting beside his pen. "You have confused confession with repair," she said. Adrian did not look away from the window. "No, I know repair is slower. You think he will return because you have made yourself guilty in public." "No." That answer finally drew silence from her. Adrian turned. Without the armor of anger, his face looked almost unfamiliar. Even to Camille. She had helped raise him into a man who could survive any negotiation because he revealed nothing. Now he stood in a room full of consequences and did not protect himself from any of them. "Then why?" she asked. "Because truth should not depend on whether Rowan forgives me." For the first time in years, Camille looked tired, not defeated, not regretful, but tired in a way that stripped some elegance from her bones. "Elias was easier," she said quietly. Adrian's hand stilled beside the watch. Camille's gaze moved toward the rain. Dead people do not contradict the stories we build for them. Living people are inconvenient. They suffer in directions we cannot control. "Is that your apology?" "No." Her mouth tightened. "It is only the truth I am capable of." Adrian said nothing. After she left, He picked up the silver watch. It was beautiful, useless, and cold. He did not put it on. He placed it in the top drawer and closed it, gently enough that the sound did not echo. Across the city, Rowan did not read the statement until after midnight. The studio had emptied. Julian had left food on the office desk and pretended not to notice when Rowan failed to eat it. Rainwater traced the windows in wavering lines. The portrait of the woman in blue silk stood beneath a lamp, her damaged hand half restored. The gold seams not yet applied. Rowan sat alone and read Adrian's statement twice. The first time, he read it like evidence. The second, like weather. There was a younger version of him who would have wept at every sentence. That Rowan would have touched the screen when Adrian named him properly. He would have mistaken recognition for love, public accountability for private healing. He would have packed a bag before dawn and returned to the Vale residence because pain, when relieved suddenly, could feel like destiny. This Rowan only turned off the phone and went back to work. His hand did not shake as he lifted the fine brush. The painted woman's fingers emerged slowly beneath his touch. Not whole, not untouched, but present. Restoration was honest because it never promised innocence. A repaired thing did not pretend it had never been broken. It simply refused to let damage be the only thing visible. A week later, Victor Hale came to the studio. He looked thinner than he had at the memorial banquet, though perhaps Rowan had never really looked at him before. Without the careful arrangement of grief, Victor was merely a man standing beneath grey daylight, holding an umbrella he had forgotten to close. "I will not ask for forgiveness," Victor said. Rowan continued sorting brushes. "Good." A faint, humorless smile crossed Victor's face. "You are less gentle than they think. They mistake quiet for gentleness." "I did too." Rowan looked up then. The room smelled of varnish, old wood, and rain-soaked wool. Victor's eyes were red around the edges. But Rowan no longer felt responsible for the grief of men who had used grief as permission. "You leaked the story knowing what it would do to me," Rowan said. "Yes." "You used Elias to hurt Adrian." "Yes. And me." Victor closed the umbrella slowly. "You were standing where I could reach." There it was. Not an excuse. Not an apology. A truth ugly enough to be useful. Rowan nodded. "Then stand somewhere else." Victor lowered his head. After a moment, he placed a sealed envelope on the desk. "Elias wrote this before the accident. It was never sent. It mentions Noel, not Adrian." His voice thinned. "I kept it because I hated that his last honest words belonged to someone none of us allowed him to love." Rowan did not touch the envelope. "Give it to Noel if you find him," he said, "not to me." Victor looked at him, startled. Rowan returned to his brushes. "I will not carry another dead man's unfinished love." After Victor left, the studio felt larger. Spring came with reluctant light. The exhibition opened on a Friday evening, when the sky was still pale at 7 and the streets smelled of thawed earth. Rowan wore a dark blue suit he had chosen himself. No one had approved the colour. No one had fastened his cuffs. On his left wrist, the old pale mark from the silver watch had nearly disappeared. The centerpiece stood at the far wall, the woman in blue silk, repaired with fine visible gold along her damaged hand, shoulder, and throat. Critics murmured about technique. Donors praised the emotional courage of imperfection, as donors often did when imperfection was safely framed. Julian drank too much sparkling water and told anyone who would listen that Rowan had fought him over the gold seams for 3 weeks. Adrian arrived 20 minutes late. Rowan saw him immediately, though he did not turn his head. Some awarenesses live too deep to be trained away. Adrian stood near the back, alone, in a dark grey coat, still wet at the shoulders. He did not approach. He did not send flowers. He did not announce a donation. He only looked at the painting as though he had finally learned that looking was an action, not a possession. Guests noticed him and whispered. Adrian ignored them. Rowan continued speaking with a curator about pigment loss. That, more than anything, felt like freedom. When the gallery emptied after midnight, Adrian was still there. Rowan found him before the portrait. The cleaning staff moved quietly in the distance, collecting glasses and folding white cloths. Outside, rain had begun again. Softer this time, almost tender against the glass. You stayed, Rowan said. Adrian turned. I was not sure I had the right to leave before you did. You have the right to do many things. I'm trying to learn which ones matter. Rowan looked at him for a long moment. Adrian did not fill the silence. That was new, in the past. His silence had been a wall. Tonight, it was an open hand left carefully on the table, not reaching unless permitted. I withdrew from Halden, Rowan said. Adrian's face changed before he could stop it. Hope, quickly restrained. Fear, more honest. Because of me, he asked. No. Rowan walked closer to the portrait. Because I wanted my choice to belong to me. Leaving because of you would still be a way of arranging my life around you. Adrian accepted that with a nod. Will you apply again? Maybe. Then I hope you go if you want to. It was such a simple sentence. Years ago, Rowan might have waited all night to hear something like it. From his coat pocket, Rowan took out a small box and opened it. The silver watch lay inside, polished, immaculate, and stripped of meaning by the care with which he had decided to let it go. Adrian looked at it, but did not reach. I am returning this, Rowan said, not because it was never mine, because I no longer need to decide myself through what you gave me. Adrian accepted the box with both hands. Thank you. Rowan almost smiled. That is a strange thing to thank someone for. I know. Then Rowan took out a second box. Plain cardboard, slightly bent at one corner. Inside was a simple watch with a brown leather strap and a white face. It was inexpensive, repaired badly, and 3 minutes slow. The bookshop owner downstairs sold it to me, Rowan said. He said it has character. I think he meant it has problems. Adrian looked at the watch for so long Rowan had to glance away. You do not have to wear it. Rowan said, May I? The question was quiet, careful, almost awkward. Something in Rowan's chest ached, not with the old pain of being unseen, but with the difficulty of allowing a new thing to exist without punishing it for arriving late. He took the watch from the box and fastened it around Adrian's wrist. His fingertips brushed Adrian's pulse. Adrian did not move. I still love you, Rowan said. Adrian's breath caught. Rowan kept his eyes on the strap. That is not forgiveness. I know. It is not permission to come home. I know. It may not be enough. Adrian looked down at him. Then I will not make it carry more than it can. For the first time, Rowan believed that Adrian was not answering beautifully. He was answering carefully. There was a difference, and it mattered. They did not kiss. A kiss would have made the night too easy, too complete, too pleasant for people who wanted stories to end where the pain became inconvenient. Instead, Adrian walked Rowan back to the apartment above the bookshop and left at the door after Rowan said goodnight. He did not ask to come in. Rowan did not ask him to stay. Weeks passed. Their new life was built from small permissions. Adrian came to dinner on Thursdays and waited downstairs until Rowan opened the door. He learned that Rowan disliked winter iris, white curtains, and being asked whether he was tired in a voice that sounded like command. Rowan learned that Adrian hated sweet tea, had never once known how to cook rice properly, and looked almost helpless when ordinary household objects refused to obey him. Some days were ugly. Rowan's anger arrived late, sharp and specific. He would remember a sentence from years ago and go silent in the middle of washing vegetables. Adrian learned not to defend himself. He learned to say, "I remember," when he did, and tell me when he did not. Sometimes, Rowan told him. Sometimes he sent Adrian home. Adrian always went. That was how trust returned, not through grand vows, but through doors closing without punishment. By September, the flopard watch had become familiar on Adrian's wrist. It lost 3 minutes every day. Adrian reset it every morning. And each time, he thought of love not as something preserved perfectly, but something maintained by hand. The first heavy rain of autumn came without warning. Rowan was closing the studio late when he found Adrian waiting across the street with an umbrella. Not kneeling, not drenched, not offering his suffering as proof. He stood beneath the rain like a man who had learned that patience had no audience. Rowan locked the studio door. He checked the handle, slipped the key into his pocket, and crossed the street at his own pace. Adrian lifted the umbrella. "May I walk you home?" Rowan looked at him, at the rain silvering his coat, at the simple watch on his wrist, at the hand holding shelter without possession. Then he stepped beneath the umbrella. Their shoulders touched. Adrian did not pull him closer. Rowan did not move away. Together, they walked through the rain-washed street, past the river, past the old bookshop, past every ghost that had once been given a room between them. The present did not erase the past. It simply stood beside it, breathing, stubborn and alive. For now, that was enough.